Hi there. I am Karen Stanbridge, and I'm an associate professor of sociology at Memorial University. And today, you are in for a treat. We are going to go on a tour of an actual archives. Now, all archives are special, but this one is really special, especially for those of you who are from Newfoundland and Labrador or have family from there. We are going to get a guided tour of the Maritime History Archives at Memorial University. Now, the official description of the Maritime History Archives says, and I quote, "It collects and preserves documents relating to the history of maritime activities in Newfoundland and Labrador and throughout the North Atlantic world," unquote. Which is true, but it sounds kind of stuffy. Really, what the Maritime History Archives is, I'm going to call it the MHA for short. Really, what the MHA is a place that's jam-packed with amazing things about the lives of people who lived and worked in Newfoundland and Labrador 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and even 200 years ago. Now, if you know anything about the history of Newfoundland and Labrador, you know that it was about fish. Right, fish, the cod fishery especially. So of course, the MHA has photos, documents, and other items pertaining to the fishing industry that you can look through. But not everyone was fishing all the time, obviously. They also ran businesses, worked as crew on supply ships. They went shopping, built houses, read newspapers, all the things that regular people do today. Except they did these things a long time ago. How different was their everyday life from ours? You can find out by visiting the MHA and looking through their collection. The MHA has 5 archivists on staff to help you. I can't wait. Let's go.
Hi, I'm Sean Panting. I'm the Development Officer for the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences here at Memorial University, and my father, Jerry Panting, was one of the people who was instrumental in establishing the Maritime History Archive. The Maritime History Archive is open every day from 9 to 4 to faculty, staff, and students, and to the general public. It's the oldest archive on campus, founded by members of the Department of History in 1971. Dr. Stanbridge has given you the collection's mandate of the archive, so you already know the types of things you might find here. We're primarily interested in fish and ships, so that makes it easy for you to remember what we collect. We're the Fish and Ships Archive. A while back, a student here on tour asked if we were like the chesses of the archive world. Maybe you could think of us that way too. The MHA is housed in the basement of the Henrietta Harvey building, and we also have a huge storage area in Duffy Place behind the Avalon Mall. We have more than 25,000 linear feet of records in total, including 55,000 boxes of crew agreements in one single collection. We also have about 25,000 photographs, newspapers, student papers, maps and charts, business records for Newfoundland and Labrador fishery supply businesses, family history collections, and other miscellaneous items. One of our founders, the late Dr. Keith Matthews, taught Newfoundland history here at Memorial, and he had an interest in how Newfoundland was first settled. In the course he taught, he had his students write a paper about a Newfoundland community. As a result, we have a large collection of student research papers that record the history of places in Newfoundland and Labrador that no longer exist because they were resettled. These papers were used as the foundation for what later became the Encyclopedia of Newfoundland and Labrador. So, when the pieces on the various communities were written for the encyclopedia, a lot of information used was based on the information collected by students in Dr. Matthews' courses. We also have a large collection of maps and nautical charts. We collect these to see where in the world vessels were going outside of Newfoundland. Some of the charts were actually used by the navigators on board the vessels, so you can see their charted course drawn right on the chart. We have crew agreements for many of these vessels, so you can follow along with the voyages and see what's happening on board the vessels on their course. We've produced several publications that have been very popular with our researchers. Births, Deaths, and Marriages in Newfoundland Newspapers was compiled by Gert Crosby, a volunteer who worked with us for many years. She went through the Newfoundland newspapers and extracted all the births, deaths, and marriages from 1810 to 1890. The publication is now available in a searchable database and is available through our website. Our second publication, Ships and Seafarers of Atlantic Canada, contains 5 or 6 large databases that came from the Atlantic Canada Shipping Project and includes crew lists for the Atlantic Canadian ports, as well as data from the official registries from those ports. They're hot sellers. Come along with me now, and we'll go into the archive and take a look at some of the more unique items in the collection. As you can see, all around the perimeter of the building, there are shelves full of documents. Here are collections of business records for fishery supply companies from all over the island and from Labrador. The earliest one is from around 1800. There are records for about 120 companies, so if you're from out around the bay somewhere, the MHA might well have business records from a little store that was in your town. Each one of the collections has its own finding aid, and there would be an administrative history written to tell you about the business, followed by a list of the documents in each one of the collections. The finding aids are all stored in the reading room, and they're also available on our website. The largest and most complete set of business records we have are for James Ryan Limited from Bonavista. Let's take a look at some of the documents from that collection. There are over 85 meters of records for that firm, dating back to the 1850s. Those business premises are now a National Historic Site. The Ryans operated a business in Bonavista from the late 1850s to the 1970s. Every one of the volumes that you see here were wrapped in brown paper when they arrived. Along with the typical business records like ledgers and journals, the collection includes other interesting items, such as these wallpaper books. These are from the 1920s. There are also floor covering sample books from the same period, clothing catalogs, paint sample books, general merchandise catalogs, and all kinds of unusual items in this collection. Not too long after the MHA acquired the Ryan collection, Parks Canada started to renovate the buildings in Bonavista, and they needed to know what would have been on the floors and what the wallpaper would have looked like and what paint colors were used. All that information can be found here in the catalogs. This is a women's garment catalog. It was used by the costume designer for the TV series Random Passage. The other amazing thing is this collection of diaries. The Ryan's shop kept a diary, and every day someone who worked in the office would write in it. The diaries run from 1874 to 1919 and have all been transcribed and are available on our website. This entry here is particularly fascinating. It's April 15th, 1912, the day of the Titanic disaster. James Ryan writes a lengthy entry about the disaster on that day, how many people were lost, how it's the biggest tragedy ever to take place near our shores. In 1915, in Bonavista, how would he have known about the disaster so quickly? No CNN, no Twitter. The news would have been received by telegraph, and it was pretty up to date. So, now we'll move on to another area of the archive where we'll look at some other unique items. What I have here in my hand now is a very unusual item. This came in a collection of business records owned by James Rourke Limited of Carbonear, and it's from around the 1920s or 30s. This is the daily schedule for the maid from the Rourke house. 7 a.m., rise, wash and comb hair, open window and air bed. 7:15, run cold water, slowly, clean out stove, empty ashes, wash down stove, light fire, put on fresh water and kettle, clean rubbers and shoes, start breakfast. 8 to 8:30, serve breakfast and eat your own. 8:30 to 9:45, wash breakfast dishes and clean up kitchen, breakfast nook, pantry, and porch, feed hens, and give water. That takes us up to not even 10 o'clock in the morning. I suspect this was a huge place, and he probably employed a number of servants. You don't very often see this kind of record for servants, or domestics, as they were known. They're rarely mentioned, even though all the merchant houses had them. Maybe if you had a really good diary, you might find information about a maid being hired or let go, but to have their actual work schedule laid out like this in such detail is quite unusual. Although the MHA is not a museum, they sometimes acquire things that really are museum artifacts. This is one of those cases. This is a sextant that was used for what's known as celestial navigation, and it has all of the different lenses and tools that go with it. This was owned originally by someone in Massachusetts. I think there's a little telescope in there as well. And you would then use a chart similar to this one to follow your course at sea. And now we'll move on to the crew agreements. The crew agreements record information about the crews on vessels registered in the British Empire in the years from 1863 to 1976. They contain information about the people who sailed the vessels, their name, age, place of birth, their job on board the vessel, what they ate, if they were literate, where the vessel sailed, medical information, and many other details of the voyage. As you can see, these documents make up the largest collection of the archive. Close to 55,000 boxes of them were transferred to Memorial in the 1970s from the Public Record Office in London, England. At that time, a decision had been made by the British government to sample the records, which means only keeping a random 10% of them. The others would be destroyed. Maritime historians here and elsewhere wanted the records to be preserved, and so they arranged for them to be transferred to Memorial. Governments are often selective about which records they keep, and in Canada now we know that the federal government only keeps a very small percentage of the paper that it generates. Not all documents get sent to an archive. There are many other treasures, such as these we've seen today, available in the collections at the Maritime History Archive. When you visit, I'm sure you'll find lots of things to help you with your research projects. Thanks.